Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well-being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. Let's talk about mental health. You know, I talk about this all the time, but I thought it was time for maybe a little bit more of an intentional check-in. Just like the other monthly solo episodes, I've got notes, as you can see if you're watching this. And if you're like, what? I could be watching this episode? Yes. Go to patreon.com/consciouslycarly. You can watch solo episodes. There is bonus footage from Consciously Cannabis episodes and a lot of other good stuff over there. So check that out to support my work, be part of the community. If you want more content, check that out. So I want to talk about mental health. And last month in the solo episode, I celebrated some anniversaries. It has been 6 years of being vegan. It has been 5 years of being alcohol-free. And as I was reflecting on that and doing some journaling around some of that, I realized that it's also been 5 years since I've been in therapy. Not necessarily directly related to the quitting alcohol. I was in therapy first, but it was definitely a part of me figuring out what was going on in my life overall. So 5 years of therapy, and that's been at different levels of consistency, but consistent nonetheless, and has been one of the most crucial ways I have worked with my anxiety, my depression, and a big reason why I feel confident in talking about this and feel good in sharing about these issues is because of the work I've done there. Why did I start therapy? Let's start there. I was not in a good place 5 years ago mentally. My depression was bad. My anxiety was bad. I was not taking care of myself. I didn't know what to do. I was doing all of these surface level things, but not really making myself dive in as much as I knew I needed to. And I was just really overwhelmed and I felt at my wit's end. And having experience working as an advocate for survivors of sexual assault and dating violence years ago, I was starting to almost have this zoomed out image of what I was going through and realizing that maybe I was starting to have thoughts that would concern an advocate. And for me, I realized I should talk to someone. And I actually started by talking to my doctor because I didn't know what to do. And she suggested right there on the spot, because of the state of myself, that I should talk to a therapist. And she actually brought a therapist into the room. And I have been working with that same therapist ever since. And now that is a story of kind of hitting a spot where you feel like you needed to. And so let's address that first. That does not have to be the reason you get to therapy. It does not have to be because someone is brought into the room. I am not judging myself, or I'm not saying I wish something would have happened sooner, but I no doubtedly could have benefited from therapy sooner because I was in need of some of the skills that I was gaining there. But you don't have to quote unquote hit your rock bottom or have a super traumatic event just recently happen to go to therapy. Of course you can. That is also a good reason to talk to someone professionally, is because of a traumatic event or something happening to you currently, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that is one stereotype maybe to work through a little bit with going to therapy. I actually looked up some of the top reasons people don't go to therapy or stereotypes around it. And one of them is that like my symptoms aren't bad enough to warrant going to therapy. And I think that happens for a lot of people. I've heard friends share about that and say, maybe I could talk about stuff, but I haven't had big T trauma, or I haven't had this happen to me, or I don't know what I would talk about. And really, of course, I'm speaking from my own experience, and only you can decide if that is correct for you or not. But my saying, or kind of mentality behind it all, is that it is 2024. We are living in a capitalist, colonialist, imperialist society, and there's a lot of shit going on. I don't even have to get into it for you to start listing the shit going on in your brain. I think that larger level, that collective level of trauma that we are experiencing, that's enough. It being 2024 and everything going on in the world is enough for you to want to talk to someone in a safe professional space, because what the hell is going on? Not to mention, you probably can think of at least one thing in your life personally that's hard and that maybe would be helpful to have someone to talk to, right? So if you're thinking your symptoms or whatever's going on with you is not bad enough, I just don't think that's true. I just don't think there is a human that couldn't benefit from a safe professional space to work out what it is to be a human. And that was one of the other stereotypes that came up, is that going to therapy means admitting there's something wrong with you. And that could be debated, right? Because there's stuff for us all to work through, but it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. There's always things to learn and places to grow into that are new and that are maybe scary, but it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's such a shameful thing that comes up with our mental health specifically that we've really don't experience in other ways. If I broke my ankle tomorrow and said, I really think I should go to the doctor, I'm not having the thought that, oh, well, that's admitting that there is something wrong with my ankle. Like, you're laughing, right? Because that's silly. But we really do come up with that shame and do a lot of mental gymnastics to say, maybe I don't need that. Maybe it's not right for me. Because it is scary to go to a place where your intention is to be vulnerable, is to work through things that are maybe hard to talk about. But it doesn't have to mean something's wrong with you. On the contrary, I would say personally that I think that means there's something very right with you. If you are intentionally looking to gain skills on how to be a better human or to work through things that you've experienced that were not your fault, that means that there is something very right with you. Another stereotype about going to therapy is just that this comes up a lot and it's fun to joke about or whatever, but that it's only about rehashing your childhood. And don't get me wrong, there are things, of course, from your past for all of us that are helpful to unpack in figuring out, oh, wow, this thing or this experience led to why I act this way, right? Like, you're just putting the dots together. You're connecting things on the board to say, this is why I am this way. It's not right or wrong, but is this how I want to be? And of course, that's part of it, but you can go to therapy for a lot more reasons than stuff that happened in your childhood. Again, not diminishing that because that's part of it often for people too. But let's talk about, within that stereotype, why go to therapy? What can you talk about there? If you've never had this experience and you are someone who's wondering, what do I even do there? If it's hard for you to imagine that, I made a list of some things that I have talked about and worked through in therapy that maybe you can relate to or maybe could see yourself also needing to work through. So, romantic relationships. Hello, that's a huge one. Whether you are in a relationship, whether you're going through a breakup. I had a really brutal breakup, and having therapy to process that made it so much safer for me to be upset and to learn how to handle those emotions and not feel ashamed and not feel all of the things that we're talking about. So romantic relationship breakups Maybe there's issues with your friends. Maybe you have issues with people at work. Issues doesn't mean bad, but we're human. We have problems with different relationships in our life, no matter how much we love someone or not. Sometimes people are really freaking difficult to get along with, and you can learn some skills to do said things, or to work through boundaries, or to decide if you need people in your life, all of the things, right? Processing grief, that has been really helpful for me. I've had quite a bit of grief in the last few years of my life and losing people, and it was paramount to me having that safe space to work through those things, I think, in allowing me to truly grieve, really, and not avoid it. That has been something that's been so helpful for me, is to show up and not be afraid of some of those things. So there are a lot of different reasons and different things you can work through in therapy, and it sounds like I'm getting commission for anybody going to therapy anywhere, but I just want to keep talking about it and keep destigmatizing this thing that I just wish we all had access to. And I want to own that this is a very privileged conversation in the sense that not everybody has access to therapy. Not everyone has access to healthcare, right? It is a blessing for my life to be able to access someone to talk to and to be able to go to therapy. And so if you have that access, I encourage you to take advantage of it, because not only will it benefit you, but it'll benefit everybody else. And we can continue to find ways within that to make sure more people have access to these services. But I know that it is a hard thing to access and seemingly impossible for many. I do have, this is not sponsored by BetterHelp. I do have podcast episodes from years ago sponsored by them, but I do still have a discount code, and you can decide if that is a place that is helpful for you. It's actually not the service I use, because like the story I shared in the beginning, there was someone brought in the room at my local facility to talk to someone. So I've been working with that same person that is in my community, but I wanted to partner with some of these online spaces like BetterHelp, because if it can get you even a little bit of a discount and get you access to therapy, I think that's worth it. So you can check that out. I'll add it in the show notes. It is one of many services like that. You should find what fits for you. And I think that's another good reminder too, right? Is that just because you go to, let's say, your first therapy appointment ever, and maybe you just don't click with this person, not because you're nervous or not because it's scary, but you just genuinely don't want to work with this person. I've talked to doctors about my endometriosis that I have had one appointment with, and I have instantly known I will not talk to them again. And that's okay. That makes sense. We all have unique needs and perspectives. So it's okay to have to shop around a bit to find someone that makes sense to be vulnerable with, right? It is something that needs to be a safe space. And so finding someone to do that with, don't shame yourself if it doesn't work with the first person, because that makes sense in so many other instances. So in terms of what do you get out of it? So what have I gotten out of my 5 years in therapy? A lot. I made, can you see that I love a list? I made notes for this episode, and then I started listing out what are things I've gained, what are skills I've learned, which was a really interesting exercise in and of itself. But one thing that kept coming up is acceptance. And there are yoga principles and philosophy that help with this as well. But the idea in the beginning for me was that anxiety and depression were two things that I was going to check off a list someday. And I was going to be like, done and dusted, figured it out. And maybe that's some people's experience. But what's been helpful for me is to learn that depression and anxiety are a part of my constitution, and they will ebb and flow. And instead of hating them or trying to get rid of them, understanding that sometimes they pop up and learning then what to do. What do I have the knowledge? What do I have the skills? What experience do I already have? And that has been a huge part of therapy for me, and talk therapy specifically, because there's lots of different methods of therapy, but talk therapy is that acceptance of what I'm going through, because so often I was stuck in patterns of spiraling out in feeling bad that I was feeling bad, which is such a waste of time and energy. But I was feeling shitty about the sense that I was depressed. And then I was feeling guilty about the fact that I couldn't handle my anxiety, right? And that is not me actually dealing with it. That's just me feeling bad about feeling bad. And so acceptance has been a huge, huge piece. I think that another lesson that I joke with my therapist now that I should get commission, and every time I say it, I should have to like trademark her, because I say this all the time, but two things can be true at the same time. I'm sure you've heard me say it in a podcast episode. More than one thing, more than two things. Multiple things can be true at the same time. You can love someone and you can not need to be in a relationship with them. You can love your job and realize it's not a good job for you. There are a lot of things that feel really contradicting, and our world tries to push us into binary thinking a lot. And therapy has allowed me to hold all of the multiple facets of life in a more complete way at once, instead of thinking like I needed to be in one mode of thinking at a time. And I think that that's really, really useful. And not only, I'm of course getting into a lot of the emotional stuff because I love talking about that, and that's been my experience and what's been helpful for me, but you can also think of therapy in a way of just, what about strengthening your self-confidence? What about building those relationship skills? What about changing behaviors that are holding you back if you have big goals? What if you're worried about becoming a mom? What if you're mourning the loss of your mother? What if you are going to totally switch your career up and you want to make a move? What if you're going to divorce your husband? What if you are going to move across the country? What if you are just really, really scared of the future and you don't know what to do next? We might think of those as things that we should be able to deal with because lots of people deal with them. But it's hard, and it's okay to say that it's hard. And if you can learn skills to make those things easier, why wouldn't you, right? Like, why not try to make some of those experiences that we all are going to have to experience? We all are going to experience grief. But it was really helpful to have someone guide me through that. And now I feel more equipped when I have to inevitably deal with that again. And those are really helpful skills to have because I didn't have them before. And when I was experiencing depression, probably at its worst level, I worked through that, was feeling better. And then the season was coming that my depression had gotten worse. And it is winter. I live in northern Minnesota, and it's not just seasonal. It's like regular depression and then seasonal sprinkled on top to make it worse sometimes. And I remember asking my therapist, like, what if it happens again? What if I fall apart? What if I can't do this? And she simply asked, well, what do you know now that you didn't before? And having a safe place that is not your friends, that is not your mom, that is not your coworker, to really be vulnerable. And I don't want to keep using that word to water it down, but to really be honest and gritty and upset and gross and cry and full of snot and whatever it is, like to have that space and then to have someone be able to say, okay, you're right, that could be hard. So what do you know now? Is just so useful in preparing myself for those moments more and more and more. So I love therapy. I love talking about mental health. I have become more appreciative of my anxiety and depression, seeing them as like homies that'll show up sometimes that I need to figure out what I can do with, versus hating myself for experiencing these things. I think we should continue to talk about all of the things we're experiencing with our mental health more and more, because it does feel really isolating and it does feel like you're the only one experiencing it. And the wild thing is that it's far from the truth. There are so many of us experiencing different problems in the world. It sounds so cliche, but there are so many things going on. There are so many things to be grateful for and thankful for, of course, in my privileged world. But there's also a lot of shit to deal with. And if you can find ways to do that, therapy is a pretty good one. And I would recommend it if you have access to that. And to talk openly with your friends and your family that feel safe to do so, because they probably relate and they'll probably want to talk more about it too. Or if you have a friend you know who's in therapy, maybe ask them some questions if you're scared to try. I think that therapy gets thrown around a lot as like the thing to do. And I don't think it's the only thing you can do for your mental health or for your wellness, of course. But it's pretty damn big. It's a pretty big one. I would probably think about maybe my top 5 things I do for my mental health and for my wellness overall. Therapy is in that top 5 right now. That could change, and that's okay, but it definitely is in the top 5 of the list. Along with things like nourishing myself with plant-based foods, mindfulness and yoga, talking about it in community, like I mentioned, moving my body, and therapy. Those would probably be my top 5 things I work on to keep me well and keep my mental health in a stable place. And I've been talking a lot about talk therapy. That's just one version of professional therapy. I've also done some EMDR work, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Whew, say that 10 times fast. I've done that work to work through my assault. That was incredible. I couldn't believe the power of EMDR in reprogramming my brain in the trauma I experienced. There are a lot of different therapies that might be specifically helpful for something you need to work through. There's art therapy. There's family therapy. There are a lot of different ways to engage in that type of healing that look different and work differently for different people. Of course, just like any other thing in our healthcare system, there's not a one size fits all. So I encourage you to be curious if this is something that's new to you and you're interested in what would work best for you, and to find a version of therapy and a therapist that feels like a safe space for you, because it's not always going to be like I'm not going there crying every day or leaving there bawling, but sometimes I'm upset, sometimes I'm laughing, sometimes I'm really, really mad. There are a lot of different ways to show up, which is another thing I think I've gained from going, is just honoring all the different things I'm feeling, again, without feeling shitty for it or without judging myself. And there are also other ways you can find yourself at this place. I, again, want to emphasize that I'm not under the illusion that the only way you can heal and be better is therapy. I don't think that at all. I think there are a lot of different ways to get there, but I do think this is a really beautiful way to help, specifically for me with my anxiety and my depression and the concerns I have for the world, the worries I have for the people in my life, the conflicts I have in different relationships. Having a space to work through that makes me a better person and a better community member and a better daughter and a better friend and a better business owner, because I am constantly looking for ways to grow. I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away, is being open and even excited, mostly excited, sometimes annoyed, at opportunities for growth. And like, that's pretty freaking cool. And I didn't have that before in the same concrete foundational way. So that is my experience in therapy. 5 years, shout out. If you have been doing that work and showing up for yourself in that way or in any other way for your mental health, I applaud you, because it's not always freaking easy. It's beautiful and it's helpful, but it's not always easy to not only access it, but to get yourself there. And if it's something that's new to you and you do have access to that, I encourage you to check out some different resources. Ask people in your life that have experience with things like this. Reach out if you want to chat and need encouragement for therapy, because it is a really beautiful thing. It is nothing to be ashamed of. I want you to hear that again. It is nothing to be ashamed of to go to therapy, to feel like you need therapy, to be in therapy, to be on antidepressants, to be doing these things that your mental health benefits from and is healthy. There is no shame in that. So let's keep having these conversations to take that shame out of these spaces and encourage each other to do the things that are making us better people for ourselves and for each other. Because remember, when we take care of ourselves in these beautiful, holistic ways, we are really taking care of our communities and we are taking care of each other. And that's pretty freaking beautiful. If you've specifically experienced depression or have some people in your life that have or are going through depression, I did a whole podcast episode series that I will share in the show notes about depression, and I will share a few other resources if you are looking for services, if you are looking to use a service like BetterHelp, if you are looking for more information about anxiety, depression, and mental health. All of that will be in the show notes to help point you in the right direction. Please take care of yourself. You are so needed. If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share in social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.